Okay, here are your sources, or a source rather, for the Robert Elliott lesson. As you can see, as opposed to the guiding questions which you have when there are multiple sources, we have our loop questions. So we only have one source, the speech that Robert Elliott gave to Congress. What we can see is we have these three questions that we should read and we should try to answer with each read through of the source. So, for the first question, what part of the Constitution does Elliott argue justifies the enforcement bill? So, to put that in other words, the Constitution is a pile of rules and laws and all that information. What specific part of the Constitution or amendment does Elliott say backs up the Civil Rights Bill or the Civil Rights Act of 1875? Second question, in what ways is Elliott making a different argument in the final paragraph of the speech? So, obviously you need a little more context. When you get to the last paragraph, that's when you should start to think about this question. You'll see it when you get there. And the last one, if the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection, why does Elliott argue the Civil Rights Bill is necessary? So the idea here that, well, in theory, the 14th Amendment granted citizenship, made citizens of all these former slaves. So if the whole point is that this amendment would make everybody equal and have all the same protections and freedoms and all that stuff, well then why does Elliott make the point that the Civil Rights Bill of 1875 is something that needs to happen? So, as you can go through and see, we have our sourcing information. This should be pretty familiar. We've talked about who it is we're talking about for this lesson quite a bit in the previous slides. And then we jump into the reading. I put a question here and there within the document itself to try to help you out as you go. So, for example, what law is Elliott referring to at the beginning of the speech? As we can see here, right, this is the beginning of the speech. This first paragraph that we have right here is the beginning. So what law in particular is Robert Elliott talking about in this section? The words, amendment, that kind of thing would be things that would help you. And then as we can see, as we go further down, we have more speech. We have some, not footnotes. Why am I blanking on the word that isn't footnote? No, they are footnotes. They go on the bottom. Right. I'm thinking like, oh, they're up on the top of the word. Big whole thing. You have some footnotes that give you some definitions of words that you might be confused about. And then afterwards, you have some questions. So what words and phrases does Elliott use to indicate his shift in tone? So reading the words are going to give off a certain impression and a certain idea of how they should be read. And especially when you consider this to be a speech, right? So as it's out loud, you'll know that, okay, he might sound like angry here, or he might sound like he's like trying to convince somebody. Think about how he comes across in the words. In what ways does Elliott make the work of African Americans central to American history? So the idea here is Elliott is making clear that former slaves are super important to what has happened so far for Americans in American history. What examples does he give to back that point up? And then lastly, why does Elliott describe the actions of African Americans during the Civil War? Right, so what things did they do during the Civil War? And then secondly, well, why would he give those examples, right? Think about how they make these former slaves sound. What message is he sending about who these people are and what they contribute? As you can see, then we come back to our loop questions. At the beginning of this video, I gave you an explanation of what I'm looking for these. So feel free to go back to the beginning of that if you need to hear a re-explanation. And then after that, you have your exit ticket. Once again, you have your rubric right here. Make sure that you give me specific sourcing information, okay? Because the questions reference particular parts of the speech itself, for those ones, feel free to use quotes, but past that, give me your own thoughts. I do not want to see people that just highlight, copy, and paste in bits of the reading in here, because that doesn't show me that you're understanding it. That shows me that you know how to copy and paste into this part of the document. Okay. As always, Google Classroom, reach me through private comments if you need help. You got this.